What was the most interesting development that's happened in the last few months for you, or few years? What would you say?
In the recycling field?
Yeah.
I think the concept of zero waste and the terminology zero waste, it's a very interesting thing. Dan, Urban Ore has done some consulting in Australia, and Dan went down there. When Dan went down to Australia to begin his consulting, he and I were working on a book called Total Recycling: Realistic Ways to Approach the Ideal. He went down to Australia and talked about total recycling, but he came back with a book from Canberra that was put out by a government agency called Zero Waste by 2010. We'd been saying total recycling for years, and everybody said, oh ho ho, how idealistic, nobody will ever do that, tut tut. He came back with a government publication that said zero waste, and zero waste, total recycling, very similar. And he came back and said zero waste, and within 3 months it was all over the internet. There was an activist group called that zero waste. People heard the term zero waste. Whew, it spread.
Hello, this is Paul Connett. As you can see, I'm in San Francisco. This is June of 1999, and I've come to attend the California Resources Recovery Association conference. They have this each year. I think this is number 23. And this year, one of the things that they're focusing on is the concept of zero waste. And I'm going to be talking to some of the leading recyclers in the country about what this zero waste is, and asking the question, is it an idealistic dream, or is it a realistic goal?
It's an absolutely realistic goal, and I expect to see it in my lifetime. Among other things, Urban Ore is nearly a zero waste company, and virtually everything we get in some people's minds would be considered waste because it's discarded. There's people who actually believe that the minute you discard something, it becomes a waste. They are usually associated with the waste industry, and you can see why they think that, because waste is the coin of the realm, and they make their income by wasting things. So they would love to think that everything becomes waste as soon as it's discarded. Discarding does not mean wasting. It means if you discard it into a system like ours, it gets conserved. And conserving is the opposite of wasting. So we are not in the waste business, but we are in the discard management business, and we're in the disposal business. We're helping people dispose of things that they don't want in ways that make sense for the earth and for the future. So we're very much in the disposal business, and we're in competition with the other people in the disposal business who have a very different method of handling things. They squash it all together and make it into waste.
Landfills are simply dinosaurs. They're archaic ways of destroying materials. They destroy value instead of conserve value. They take material out of commerce. They waste jobs. They destroy jobs. They're part of a system that destroys human value as well as material value.
Landfills are an admission of defeat.
I ran a program in Sonoma County called Recycle Town. And what Recycle Town was, which we did in the end, was a series of buildings that we built out of the material that was going in the dumps. And this Recycle Town looks like a Wild West frontier town. And people actually love this thing, and I have some pictures of that too. They just love it because they get it. You know, it's like when people see a pile of junk, most people see a pile of junk, other than the tinkerers who see something else. But the average person, when they see lots of junk, they just see a mess. But when they see Recycle Town, they get it.
My name's Ted Ward, and I work for the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority, which is on the north coast of California, right next to the Oregon border. We're a rural community of about 30,000 people, and we're pretty far isolated from the typical recycling markets. We're also, politically, it's one of the most conservative counties actually in the country, and yet Our local government, the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority, was the first in the country to endorse the messages of zero waste and welfare for wasting and jobs from design and discards. Each one of those policies has a number of things that we need to do to try to make that happen. And I know that a lot of people, when they first hear the term zero waste, are uncomfortable with it. And frankly, I was too. But I think it's really important to understand what exactly is zero waste and how we might be able to get there and why it's an important direction.
Zero waste is a design principle. If we plan for eliminating waste, whether we reach 100% elimination is not the point. But the point is to start planning for elimination of waste rather than managing waste.
It means designing products for recyclability and reuse. It means infrastructure for repair and redistribution, and of course it means recycling and composting. It's a combination concept. When recyclers say recycling, they're not just talking about crushing bottles and making new bottles.
Is zero waste an idealistic dream, or is it a realistic goal?
Actually, zero waste is happening today, so I have to say it's actually in progress. We highlighted at this conference and at last year's National Recycling Conference businesses that are achieving over 90% diversion, and to us that is well on the way to zero waste. Our slogan is zero waste or damn close.
You talk about businesses. What kind of businesses are getting 90% diversion rates?
Well, companies like Hewlett-Packard in Roseville, California is at 92% recovery. The Mad River Brewing Company up in small brewer up in Northern California is at 98%. Spetzer Vineyard was highlighted in our presentations here at the conference at 93% recovery. And over 35 companies identified last year as reporting over 90% waste diversion. So it's large and small all over the country. And what we're finding is typically businesses that really take recycling, waste reduction to heart are easily getting 60 to 80% waste diversion, and the 90% diversion levels are coming from those who are working exceptionally hard at that.
Hi, I'm Michael Gross with Zanker Road Landfill. In 1985, we opened a Zanker Road Landfill to do a little bit of recycling. Currently, our recycling rate is 95%. We receive roughly 1,300 tons of material in a day, consisting of both yard waste, wood waste, demolition, concrete, asphalt, gypsum, sorted materials.
We have a new pilot program that we're testing right now, which we think is cutting edge and is the way of the future for our program and hopefully other programs as well. We're testing with 3,000 households a 3-bin system where residents get a bin for organic materials, and that's for both yard waste and vegetative food waste. They get a second bin for commingled recyclables, which is for paper, all kinds of paper, and for bottles and cans. And they get a third bin for their trash. And when I say bin, I mean cart. They're tailored to the size of the household. They can get a 32-gallon cart, they can get a 64-gallon cart, they can get a 96-gallon cart. It's weekly collection, and the program's worked really well. We've had up to 50% diversion in this program, which is phenomenal given that curbside on average does less than 30%.
Last year, Zanker was awarded a demonstration project by the City of San Jose to start recycling food waste. We're talking lettuce, we're talking meat scraps, we're talking mixed paper and waxed cardboard. These materials were actually going to be composted down in our facility in Gilroy, and we're expecting to do about 200 tons a day down at that facility. And that's material that is currently not being recycled.
Instead of composting, because I didn't really have the financial backing to start a composting facility, what I would do is start a soil yard, and the idea was to just work with existing byproducts that existed and bring these in and blend them and make different soil blends. And I'd do that as a part-time basis. Well, the whole thing grew tremendously, and actually led to a business now that is doing more than $7 million a year. Our real forte in this area is actually taking products that are out there. It might be waste materials from a landfill that have been composted or partly composted, and some forest byproducts, and bringing them together and making different products out of them, different types of soil and so forth. So we've probably got about 20-some products that we sell. And we also design them for specific functions. We have a soil just for rhododendrons and camellias and acid-loving plants. We have a soil that's just for turf, that's modeled after many of the types of soils that you find in athletic fields, very sandy and so forth.
Now, some people are saying in the United States, recycling is too expensive. It's cheaper for us to shove it all into a packer track and send it to some landfill, probably a long way away. What's your response to that?
It's never cheaper to send it to a landfill, because a landfill, the whole garbage system is 100% subsidized. And when you pay a garbage fee, you're paying not only to have it hauled away and put into a landfill, you're going to have to pay for perpetual maintenance. You have to pay for a perpetual garbage guardian to guard that garbage for thousands of years, really.
But we're not doing that right now.
Well, no, and that's part of the problem. All we're doing is putting off the bill to our children and grandchildren, because the EPA acknowledges that every landfill will leak. Somebody's going to pay a cleanup bill sometime.
Yeah.
And so all it is a bias in time that lets us think that that's a cheap solution. Really, it's the single most expensive thing to do.
You have landfills now that are hundreds of acres, that the only thing between the toxics in that waste and the groundwater is a couple of feet of clay and a plastic liner the thickness of 2 credit cards. That's going to fail. Everybody knows it. Who understands these things, who wishes to think about it, and who is not paid to, is not making their living building these things. It's not rocket science, and yet that's our national policy to landfill.
We just evaluated how much of the waste we diverted from this conference. It's over 90%. Less than 10% of the waste that was produced at this conference is going to the landfill. And if you can do it at a conference, if you can do it in residential programs, it can be done everywhere. You don't need to build incinerators. This material has value. I mean, when you incinerate it, you're destroying the value of those materials. And that ultimately, our whole society is dependent on the resources we have, and they're finite. And we need to be able to preserve them as much as possible. And when you incinerate them, you're destroying their value. When you recycle them, you're preserving their value.
There are a number of problems with both disposal and incineration as materials management techniques. They may lead to collection efficiencies and labor efficiencies in terms of management, but in terms of resource efficiencies, they suck, to be frank.
You say it's very expensive to recycle. Another way to say that is that there's a lot of money that can be used to build a recycling industry. And the whole building a recycling industry is a giant economic activity. It's the whole back end of the GNP, and it's waiting to be developed. It's a massive opportunity.
Well, what kind of practical steps has Del Norte taken en route to this goal of zero waste?
The Zero Waste Action Plan does a number of things that typical solid waste plans don't do. One, it looks at the structural incentives of how it is that you finance your discard collection system. Because a lot of times there are tremendous tools that are within these contracts that are largely established with local governments to make sure that resources are conserved. And in fact, what usually happens is, without knowing it, many local governments will establish incentives to actually continue wasting. So let's talk a little bit about how that works. Well, say you're building an incinerator, for example. Well, you've got a couple big issues. One, you're building a big black box, and it's trying to take a incredibly mixed stream and do one thing with it. Now, the problem with a big black box taking a mixed material stream and then trying to consider that all as one kind of resource are many. First of all, you don't know exactly what it's going to do until you build the thing. Second of all, generally it's going to cost a lot of money, which means you're devoting a lot of investment into paying for that thing up front. And third, when you actually start paying for it, you need to make sure that you have a steady, consistent input to that facility in order for it to pay off, which is kinds of locks up your flow. All of those things are big problems. One of which, let's take them one at a time. When you lock up your waste stream, going backwards, when you lock up your waste stream, you preclude other options. You've stopped thinking about how those materials are resources as anything but energy. And when you stop doing that, that's very dangerous, because there can be markets that open up for materials that are in the waste stream that you could potentially recover. You need to have an ongoing incentive to be able to do that. And when you build a big black box or a big incinerator, then that incentive evaporates. Second, when you're financing a big thing, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that you're actually basing that financing ultimately on the taxing authority of a local community, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to pay those things off. Well, if you're really serious about conservation, then why not lend those same kinds of tools to the folks who are collecting and processing materials? With that same kind of investment, you can not build one big black box, but lots of little beautiful green boxes throughout your community, because remarkably and delightfully, usually resource recovery, repair, and recycling, these are small business enterprises. These are local business enterprises, local jobs, local dollars.
You can buy a giant recycling industry for the same amount that you spend on a landfill.
Yeah. Or an incinerator.
Or an incinerator.
Yeah.
Or a large facility like that. You can have a whole collection of small businesses like this that make more jobs and that are a lot of fun to work in, and that in fact provide a more diverse and stable overall community base.
Looking at on-site management, looking at institutional incentives, looking at your rate structure, these things can be great steps forward. The other thing that a Zero Waste Action Plan does that typical solid waste management plans do, in addition to, of course, looking at recycling, composting, and waste prevention, which are standard now, at least in California where we're from, but they also look at how we can work together to develop markets for these materials. Recycling, resource conservation, repair, these can be economic development strategies. As we're developing jobs, it's time to recognize that our system is perhaps not so simple as it once was, and that we are deriving community benefits by having these kinds of businesses exist. Just like we previously thought we needed to establish landfills, similarly our repair and reuse shops and salvage shops are as vital to our communities as basic pieces of infrastructure. One other thing we're doing is we're developing a resource recovery park. A resource recovery park has been called an eco-industrial park in other areas, but the analogy is somewhat like airports. You cannot have a viable airline industry until the airplanes have somewhere to land.
The idea of these integrated discard management facilities has spread far and wide throughout the world and throughout the United States, and there's versions of these things being constructed in many different places. We have been fortunate enough to be in on the design of some of the earliest ones of these, so we're known as a pioneer in the field. The first one of these integrated discard management facilities that we designed that was actually built was right here in California in Sonoma County, and it was about 3 or 4 years ago. Another project that we've been associated with is the Zero Waste Project in Canberra, Australia. We have a large reuse module, we have a large recycling module with many different subcategories of material being handled separately by different companies, and we have a large composting and crushing and soil blending kind of module that takes care of all the organics and a lot of the inorganics. So those facilities that Canberra is building and intends to build and intends to get to zero waste with will go online in the next 10 years. Their goal is zero waste by the year 2010. In Melbourne, they have decided that not only are they going to build these integrated discard management centers, and the first one will be on a site in the northwestern part of Melbourne, and it serves 660,000 people. Not only will they build that, and not only will they build it around the idea of reuse, recycling, composting, and not only will within that there will be 12 major categories of material that will be handled by this facility, but they've also decided to follow a small business model. and they are going to provide an entity like an airport management facility does. You know, most airports in this country are publicly owned. They're publicly developed. The infrastructure is entirely publicly developed, and we have all sorts of ways of funding that. And then we set up an airport authority to manage the whole place, and they manage all the leases, and they deal with all the different kinds of entities that come in, including the airlines, but also including the food courts and the security companies and the CAD companies and all the other things that it takes to make that whole big complex run. And that's what these integrated discard management centers are going to have. They're going to have a management system that the government provides, and it will make sure that there's some sort of level playing field out there where everybody gets a chance to be in there. And we're going to have, in that place, we're going to have all these different companies, and they're going to be both competing and cooperating in the same framework. And everybody will want to go there to get rid of their stuff because they'll know it'll all get recycled. There will be almost nothing going to landfill.
You could also, for a more comprehensive eco-park, an eco-industrial park, you could combine a discard management center with manufacturing facilities, perhaps around the perimeter or in the neighborhood. And you could have manufacturing facilities using the discard management center as a materials exchange among each other. And these kinds of eco-parks and integrated systems that are industrial ecosystems really tend to co-evolve, and there are several throughout the world that are now being studied as models of integrated industrial development that are structured like an ecosystem, and the businesses tend to co-locate because it's to each one's advantage.
We have the most productive fishing harbor in California, Crescent City, and so we had a lot of fish waste, and we were previously composting that fish waste for use as a vegetative cover on the landfill. And although that's not a horrible use, it's not the best use, and we knew that. And so we started working with a company called Eco-Nutrients, and they really get that if something is a waste, you can get it cheaply, and you can use those resources in a way that's cost-effective to make a profit. And so they're now taking all of the fish waste that's generated, and in fact we're importing fish waste now. Why? Because they're making a variety of products. They're making a fish slurry that's used as a fertilizer for organic fertilizer markets. They're drying crab and shrimp shells to make things from dissolving sutures to contact lenses. Chitosan, for instance, a lot of people now hear advertised as, you know, this new wonder diet thing. That's produced from crab and shrimp shells that are processed in my county. So they're a profitable business where once we were paying to manage this material ultimately, you know, for a very low-end use, now they are actively collecting the material, and that material is no longer in our waste stream. And that's a perfect example of zero waste. Zero waste from a municipal perspective is actively trying to facilitate material efficiencies by transferring the responsibility for managing materials from the public sector to the private sector. And by doing so, creating local jobs.
The numbers that Brenda Platt and Kelly Lease, these are researchers on the Institute staff, have come up with are very dramatic. If you take a given amount of materials, let's say 10,000 tons, and you put it in an incinerator or a landfill, you create about 1 job per year on a sustainable basis. But if you recycle that material, you can create 6 to 10 jobs for that same 10,000 tons. If you repair and reuse those materials as commodities, you can create something like 90 to 100 jobs for every 1 job as when you put it in a landfill or an incinerator. And for cities that need entry-level jobs and jobs that put people on a track for more skills and more income and more self-esteem, recycling cannot be beat. You could go to Maine, you could go to Massachusetts, and you will see the largest growth in jobs in manufacturing sectors and in processing sectors comes from recycling, all in the last 20 or 30 years. And it's the small business sector. Recycling is small businesses. And that is where job creation comes from. You have to deal with a whole panoply, a whole industrial matrix of small companies, as opposed to one company that puts everything in one truck, takes it to one transfer station, and takes it to one disposal facility. That is linear. Recycling is complex and circular and sustaining. Garbage disposal is not sustaining.
Illustrate this concept of creating jobs from discards with the whole concept of deconstruction.
Well, we just completed a project for the Hartford, Connecticut Housing Authority. They had money to demolish, blow up, or bulldoze and take everything from old public housing facilities that had to come down and bring it to a landfill. That job would have taken, for one small building, 8,200 square feet, that job would have taken half a day and employed 1.5 people to remove that building and provide an empty site to the housing authority. What they chose to do instead is to invest in a demonstration program called deconstruction or disassembly. And 9 workers who lived in public housing were trained by the union, the International Laborers Union. They deconstructed the house. They recovered $9,000 worth of wood, bricks, sinks, electrical plating, etc. They are now in union jobs. When they finish their current status, when they become journeymen and women, they will be making $13.50 an hour within the year, plus $10 an hour benefits for insurance and pension.
The program that we heard about with the Hartford Housing Authority and the Fathers Program was really something that we felt was important through the Fathers Program, and the responsibility through the training with the job to the family. It's all connected. For the first part of this project, we looked at demolition skills and safety skills, what we call general construction skills for those residents with really no construction background to be able to work safely and to take down these buildings. But at the same time, what was again interesting with this project is that we had environmental concerns. And so we married the two training, both construction and environmental, to give these residents a well-rounded education so that they walked away with not just construction skills, but they walked away with environmental remediation skills that included state certification cards for them to not only work in this project, but really any project within Connecticut.
But even more than that, there was a very dramatic episode, because after the building came down and we were interviewed by the press, one of the workers, who by the way said that he had been employed before, but he had never been employed regularly, and he had never had insurance, health insurance for himself and his family. And he told the newspaper woman, "I grew up in that very unit that was just deconstructed, but I grew up without a father. And this deconstruction company is allowing me to be a father to my kid and to be a homemaker." And as a result of that, when we heard that, we were stunned with how profound his experience had been. We took him to Washington, D.C., and thanks to people down there, particularly Congressman Chris Shays of Connecticut, we had a meeting with the White House staff, and he repeated this anecdote about his life and his experience with deconstruction. Within 2 weeks, President Clinton had a $50 million new initiative for deconstruction of abandoned urban buildings, and HUD changed their rules. HUD spends about $700 million a year taking down, demolishing public housing units. Now they are encouraging proposals from cities to have deconstruction. We turned 9 lives around in Hartford, in public housing in Hartford. There is enough public housing that needs to come down in Hartford for every citizen in that city who wants a good union construction job to get it. The best way to train a construction person is to train them in taking down a building. And I mean, also, I must say that John Wardlaw, the head of the Housing Authority in Hartford, deserves a lot of credit. He didn't just create jobs for these folks in the program, he created a new business. There's a new company called the Hartford Community Deconstruction Company, owned by 51% by the very 9 workers who were recruited and trained. And within 10 days of this date, today is June 8th, I believe, that company, with the Manafort brothers, will have an estimated $12 million worth of contracts to take down downtown city buildings and to do further deconstruction of public housing. So what Mr. Wardlaw has done is created an incentive package and a training package that has taken people not only to excellent union jobs, but to entrepreneurship.
The only true social service in America today is when a person is able to contribute toward their own well-being. And anyone who can't contribute toward their own well-being, there isn't a service in the world that can assist that person. So a job is the #1 service for Americans.
I was able to go join a union, get benefits for the kids, which is great, and I like doing construction work, so I think this here was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Well, we're in a hotel room in the Concord Inn in Concord, California. Tell us what some of these items are, which items are going to be reused, recycled, and where they're going to go.
What we have first, we'll be taking up the carpet here on the floor, and we'll be reusing the carpet. A company called Twin Cities has asked for the carpet. They're going to reuse it. In what capacity, I'm not sure, but they want to use it for outdoor use in a recreation facility. The padding underneath will be recycled with a company called Union Recovery.
Okay.
And so the carpet reused, the pad recycled, that's all taken care of. Okay, next we have the main window area, and the glass we will be recycling with a company called Strategic Materials. And you'll see the glass trim is all aluminum, and the aluminum will also be recycled. The glass will be taken out separate, and the aluminum will be recycled with refund recycling. Okay, here we are in the bathroom area, where we will have mirror on the door, mirror on the wall, which we will be recycling with a company called This and That. The door itself, the bathroom vanity, also will be recycled with a company called This and That. All 3 items will all go to the same recycling company.
And this and that is like a reuse retail outlet?
Yes, the glass and mirror, I believe, will be recycled completely, and the vanity will be resold as a used item at discount price.
Javier, this doesn't seem to be very difficult to me to salvage and reuse and recycle these materials.
Right, the work is not difficult. You can hire any laborer to do the work. The problem and the time is in the thinking of the process, the organizing of the process, and organizing it to a point where you come in, everyone who's there knows that we're here to recycle and reuse, and we do it the right way. We also want people like hotels and other businesses to know and understand that these services are available, that there are options to just throwing your stuff away, that you can recycle many, many things as you put your mind to it.
Tucked away in the hills of Sonoma County is what looks like an old Wild West town. Upon closer inspection, a visitor may recognize some items from more recent years. This is Recycle Town, made from reused construction materials with some odds and ends thrown in.
So we sit here at the landfill taking in these things that people just throw away. So that's what we do here. We're like the guardian angels of these things that get thrown away, and then we sell them to people. We sell them to people who see things differently. We sell them to people who fix them. We sell them to people who use them as is, poor people. And we sell them to people who make art out of them. And every year we have an art event here just to show that, in fact, garbage is an attitude. It's not a particular thing.
Recycle Town is really worth a trip to Petaluma. For directions and more information, call area code 707-795-3660.
When we sell our building materials out of buildings, that we can say, this building was in this place and had this use and this function, they go, wow, it's like, would you like some furniture made of Presidio wood? It's not just any old wood. It's something that has history, and that brings this connection, because as we say when we do our skit, it's a process, not a product. Mm-hmm. We've begun to see life in terms of a product and not a whole process. We don't know where it came from, we don't know where it's going, and we don't know what it's part of. It's just a discrete thing. So when we take material out of a particular building and we can tell them where it comes from, they get that message. So they did that at Recycle Town. But it took us so long to build Recycle Town because most of the wood that goes to the dump is matchsticks, because they've already done that. So we went, well, we better take buildings apart. So that's how we got into that. And then I said, well, enough of this nonprofit stuff. I'm going to start my own business. And another reason we really want to do this is important, is if you can't do something in the real world, as in the private sector, it ain't going to happen. So I wanted to make the point that you can get out there, you can run a real business doing God's work and make money. That's sustainability. It's called the triple bottom line, right? You're doing something good for the environment, you're doing something good for people. People need meaningful work, not just shit work. They need to do something that matters.
Yes.
And they need to get paid for it.
Yeah.
You know, so if you can make money, so you're prospering economically, you're doing good for society, and you're doing good for the environment, you've got a triple bottom line. That's sustainability, in my mind. Okay. So that's what we're doing.
Now, you were telling me before, and I found this absolutely fascinating, that some of these building materials are more valuable today than they were when they first went into that building. Could you explain that?
In 1942, when they built all these military buildings, for example, the 2x10 spanned 22 feet. We have lots of 22-foot 2x10s out there.
Yeah.
But you can't do that span right now. They had to change the rules because the lumber that they're getting right now is only 40 years old, and it's not so strong. So it now can only span 16 foot. So you rarely get 20-foot 2x10s anymore because 16 foot is the current span. It weighs 3 times as much. You just pick them up and you go, whoa, you can see it. Plus it's got this sheen. You know, when a tree, it's almost like it's still alive even after you've cut it, because it puts out this stuff, and I don't know what this stuff is called, but it puts it out and it creates this thing called a patina. So it's got a different kind of color. You know, the old Douglas fir is a beautiful orange color. So what we do is we take that lumber, especially those 2x10s, and we turn them into flooring because it's become hardwood. Yes. We turn the redwood into wainscoting, and we turn the fir into flooring, so that when it's in the application, you can see it, and you can say to your buddies, you know where this floor came from, you know, and they love it.
Okay, basic profile of Urban Ore is Urban Ore began in 1980 as a partnership and incorporated as a California corporation in July of 1981. This is now 1999, so it's been 18 years that we've been incorporated. We have a corporate statement of purpose that is to end the age of waste. And we do that by operating this reuse facility that's almost 2 acres, well, it's a little over 2 acres, 2.2 acres altogether, including the outside and the inside warehouse. And we buy and sell goods, and we go out and make pickups. And we pay people. A lot of people just drop things off, and we're careful to tell them that we're not a nonprofit, and they say, that's okay, I just want to get rid of it. And we say, well, that's what we're here for. We salvage from 1.5 to 3 tons per day from the Berkeley transfer station. Our gross income this year, we hope to hit 1.6. Last year we were well over $1.5 million.
As far as payroll is concerned, about 50% of all the money we make goes to payroll. So we're a very, very labor-intensive business.
So you're putting a lot of money into the Berkeley community, really.
Well, there's that money, and then there's another 200. Last year, out of that 1.5 million, 283,000 went directly into the hands of our suppliers.
We also provide 22 full-time jobs that are a living wage and fully covered with health insurance, fully paid health insurance for the staff and all of their dependents.
And how long have you been working here?
About half of my life.
Oh, really? How long is that?
About 16 years.
We count on people knowing the inventory, and we like to pay them enough so that they can support themselves and their family. And we like people to stay around for a while because their knowledge is the wealth of the company. It's the intellectual capital.
And in fact, I spoke to, is it Claudio outside?
Claudio. Mm-hmm.
Claudio, and he's been working here, what, 16 years?
Since 1983. Mm-hmm.
So you've got...
He's the sales manager.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
That's...
One of the key parts of our program, the Grassroots Recycling Network's program, is trying to educate the public that garbage is an unfunded mandate, that local governments and taxpayers need to wake up and realize that we're going to have more and more expense, more and more waste, and more environmental destruction until we hold producers and corporations accountable for wasting.
There is a large move afoot in the environmental and recycling communities to put a little burden on the manufacturers and have people pay extra for those products. If you're going to manufacture something designed to be wasted, then you should have to pay.
We pay at least 3 times for every object in our lives. We buy it, of course, and then after we're done with it and we have something left, then we have to pay to dispose of it. And then we have to pay yet again when that system doesn't work. When somebody does illegal dumping, landfill leaks, you have toxic stuff coming out of the stack of an incinerator, all of those kinds of issues cost us all, and we pay several times. As long as you have that disconnect, free access to whatever it is you want to buy, and free access or relatively cheap access to however you want to dispose, and no extended producer responsibility connecting those two, we can never have a material efficient economy until the product with the lowest price is also the product that does the least harm. Our market economy can only lead us down in terms of environmental protection.
A tiny 5% of the people in the world consume 1/3 of its resources and produce almost half the non-organic waste. Those people are us.
I think essentially over the last few decades, to some degree, industrial societies have almost gone mad. They've drifted down a development path that makes very little sense to most of us when we look at it closely, but it has its sort of internal economic logic. I think the key now is to start working towards ways that reconcile our day-to-day economic choices of, getting by on the amount of money we have, buying the things that we need on a day-to-day basis, reconciling those kinds of needs with the long-term needs of the planet. It should cost us the same thing to do the right thing ecologically and to do the cheap thing practically in the short run. And what we have to do is resolve this kind of tension, and that means addressing basic questions of why is it that when a mining company or a logging company causes an enormous ecological impact, why is it that that damage is not effectively priced? Why don't we pay for that damage up front in the price of the product instead of having to pay for it over the long run, which we already do?
Grandpa! What? Will I grow up to be big and strong like you?
I sure hope so, son.
Why wouldn't I, Grandpa?
Well, unless something is done soon, big old trees like me will be nothing but a memory, like the giants in the old fairy tales.
But Grandpa, what would the forest be without old ones like you?
I think they call it a tree farm, son.
There are roughly between 200 and 230 million tons per year of municipal solid waste in the country. And let's say this is represented by this amount. But there's this whole triangle of waste of 11 billion tons that we don't see.
The real problem, actually, in terms of resource conservation, as much concern and valid concern as there is over the environmental impacts of solid waste disposal, whether that's landfilling or incineration, the real impacts of our lives are in extraction and processing and mining and delivery of the materials in our lives. Every object in our lives it's as if it has a long shadow of environmental impacts. Just reaching in here. This paper cup, for example. This started as a bunch of trees. And those trees got mined, oftentimes harvested, oftentimes in clear cuts. With clear cuts, you have impacts on siltation, clogging up the rivers, loss of fisheries habits. Of course, you have the loss of the forest. Then it's pulped. That takes a tremendous amount of energy to turn a tree into pulp. And then, of course, you have to deliver this. Also, the person can drink it once and throw it away. And once you throw it away, you have to go somewhere else and get a new cup and go through those extraction impacts all over again. The extraction impacts typically are well over 150 times any typical impacts associated with disposal, whether that's landfill or incineration. And so you really need to look at figuring out a way to make a material efficient economy. And you have to realize that we are the first generation in the history of the planet to witness a doubling of the human population in our lifetimes. That alone is a staggering and sobering fact. Simultaneously, our rate of consumption on an individual basis has also dramatically increased. These absolutely are unsustainable practices.
We'll sit on the street on drop-off programs and people bring in all types of containers, show the recycling logo on the bottom, say they want to do it. We say, you know, call them up on the 800 number, tell them you love their product, you hate their package, change it. Don't buy their package. Organize zero waste committees in your community. The basic issues, I think, are public issues that have been around for hundreds of years. It's efficiency, except we're talking about efficiency in government, business, and get rid of waste and don't contaminate the environment. That's zero waste. It's an efficiency issue. The second issue is jobs. We've always been talking about jobs in this country. Well, why bury this stuff in the ground, create pollution, and cause more taxes when we can create jobs from this discards? Take the welfare money and the retraining money and train people to do demanufacturing of computers, just as an example, deconstruction of old buildings and recovering these old materials. So it's job. And the last issue is as American as apple pie is tax reform. Tax reform. We're talking about going to the federal government, the state government, and changing the tax bills to get rid of the subsidies for cutting down our trees and using up all our raw materials.
This report, Welfare for Waste, How Federal Taxpayer Subsidies Waste Resources and Discourage Recycling, is a joint project of the Grassroots Recycling Network, Friends of the Earth, Taxpayers for Common Sense, and the Materials Efficiency Project. It's a report that outlines how U.S. federal subsidies, tax expenditures, direct program expenditures, and other subsidies undermine recycling and efficient resource use and promote waste. These subsidies include expenditures to support the mining industry, to support the timber industry, to support production of energy and of petroleum, which is the primary feedstock for plastics manufacturing, and to support waste disposal, landfill and incinerator construction. And we've also tried to provide a general guide to how broader, more general subsidies have even greater impact. For example, how the systematic underpricing of energy tends to create a powerful incentive to use virgin materials rather than to use secondary materials, because you can save far more energy through recycling than you can through incineration, for example, and much more energy is used in primary materials manufacturing industries than in recycling.
We need a national materials policy that favors resource conservation. These the tax policies and federal laws like the Mining Act of 1872 were created a century ago when it made sense to have policies to open up the West and to get more materials out of the ground for our budding industry. It doesn't make sense anymore.
A tiny 5% of the people in the world consume 1/3 of its resources and produce almost half the non-organic waste. Those people are us. Nothing is destroying this planet faster than the way we North Americans live.
Developing countries suffer on a regular basis because they sell us a large share of the primary commodities that feed our consumer economy. We need to understand the impacts involved in the choices we make every day. If you are buying a piece of paper, that paper may well have come from pulp from a forest in Indonesia that was liquidated. If you're buying something metal, the copper could have come from the Philippines or from Zambia or from Chile. These are global economics to all of these materials industries, and we have to look at the international development policies that often tell developing countries that the way to economic success is to export primary commodities. And when those countries find out in the long run that all that's happened for them is they've become dependent on these industries, what often ends up happening is that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank tell them that the only way to pay their debts in the short run is to focus even more on these kinds of extractive industries. It's been a disastrous, difficult long-term cycle for these countries because they've seen the prices for the commodities that they sell decline over time, so that the actual economic returns to them have been very, very low.
Remember that when we talk about mining in places like Indonesia and Brazil, we're talking about destroying precious rainforests, some of the most biologically rich environments in the world.
The modern consumer economy is not sustainable either for industrialized countries or for the developing countries that provide an awful lot of the materials in the first place. We need to help find ways to get more value added out of shaping materials into things and reusing them and reshaping them over time, rather than simply pulling more out of the earth, more out of the forests, consuming them quickly, and then shooting them out the other end of the economy into the landfill.
After we have reduced our consumption, in order to achieve total reuse and recycling, including composting, we might have to ban some products. But when we get down to that level, at last, probably a lot of cultural changes will have happened that when people change their mind, it's a very interesting thing. The whole culture is going this way, and it seems like an inevitable force of nature that the whole culture is going this way, but then suddenly it'll turn. And then it seems inevitable that the whole force of culture is going this way, and who would ever have imagined it some other way? And anybody over 40 years old can remember at least 2 or 3 things in their lifetime that have been like that. Just suddenly, there's a change. Some people call it a paradigm shift. And when that happens, the whole force of manufacturing and all of the people's will to consume things changes. People change their mind. And when people change their mind, they won't be buying the products that can't fit into the existing recycling systems, and manufacturers will take their cues and they will begin not producing things that can't be recycled. There may be some governmental interventions that may be required, but perhaps cultural forces will just do it.
You can find out more about this. This is, like I said, this is not that hard. It may sound radical at first, but once you start looking into it, you'll recognize that there are steps you could take in your own community. One place you can look is on CRRA's website. That's www.crra.com. If you look under policies there, you'll see what's referred to as the Agenda for the New Millennium. That's a policy document of the oldest statewide recycling organization in the United States, and it describes the policies of zero waste and welfare for wasting, jobs from design and discards, and gives a number of things you can do, either as a local government, as a business, or as an individual. So I encourage you to check it out there, see what you can do, contact us, we'll help any way we can.
Great. Well, we've had a chance to talk to some of these recycling experts, some of these people that get their hands on it, and some of the big theorists. We've had to listen to all kinds of different people. I've been convinced that this zero waste is not so much a prissy little thing that you've got to be absolutely zero waste. It's a question of setting a direction, a goal. The goal is to absolutely minimize the amount of waste that goes to landfill, to treat landfill as a failure. Every time that waste goes into a landfill, you are failing. You are failing to conserve resources. You are failing to use those resources to stimulate your economy. You're failing to use those resources to generate local jobs and build the local community. And you're failing. You're failing in adjusting to the demands of the 21st century. We've got to learn to use our materials in a way that we can get something good from them, but we can share these same materials with the future. I was particularly excited to hearing about deconstruction, where incredibly, some materials that you can, lumber that you can pull out of buildings, particularly in this area in California, are more valuable than the materials that went in the first place. The whole aging process has made this wood more valuable for flooring, for furniture, and so on. This is exciting, and I think we need in this country and across the world to re-excite people with recycling. It isn't enough just to think of bottles and cans and newspapers. We're talking about a new economy, a new paradigm. We have to, as we've been told many times, stop subsidizing the bad things, challenge industry to design objects and materials in a better way, so to minimize the use of toxics, minimize the use of unnecessary packaging, and maximize the potential to use these materials again and again and again. This is Paul Connett. Thank you for watching.